When you think of Houston, what pops into your head? Maybe it's the sprawling energy companies, a buzzing art scene, or just how massive the city is, a real symbol of American drive. But under that shiny surface, there's a chilling reality. Houston is a city where people are bought and sold. And the body count from this dark trade? It often slips by unnoticed, just another unsolved case. We're talking about a place that's been consistently ranked as the worst for human trafficking in the entire United States. Welcome. Today we're not looking at the Houston of impressive skyscrapers and endless opportunity. Instead, we're pulling back the curtain on a city struggling with a deeply rooted horror, a booming market for human lives, one that's tangled up with a disturbing pattern of violence and unsolved murders. This isn't just a crime problem, it's a human catastrophe happening right under our noses, even if it feels invisible much of the time. For years now, Houston's been known as a major hub for both sex and labor trafficking. The numbers? They're staggering. Some estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of people are trafficked in Texas every year, and a huge number of them pass through or get trapped in Houston's massive urban sprawl. But this isn't just about statistics. It's about the cold, calculated destruction of lives, the complex workings of sophisticated criminal groups, and the bloody price paid by those who get caught in their net. Our aim today is to show you how these trafficking rings operate, to help you understand just how vulnerable their victims are, and to face the grim truth of how this trade fuels violence, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and grieving families. We'll look at the evidence, listen for the echoes of those who've been lost, and try to figure out why this crisis just keeps going in one of America's biggest cities. To really get a handle on what's happening in Houston, we first need to understand just how big this invisible epidemic is. Like we said, Houston is consistently named a top city for human trafficking in the U.S. The number of reported cases in the city has apparently almost doubled in recent years, and that's even with more people knowing about the issue. Texas, as a state, has some of the highest numbers of trafficking cases in the country, second only to California. In 2023 alone, 900 cases were reported, affecting over 1,700 victims. Some estimates paint an even more terrifying picture, suggesting that as many as 313,000 people are trafficked for sex in Texas each year. Houston, with its massive population of over 6 million, sadly provides the perfect cover for these operations, letting traffickers hide their victims with disturbing ease. So, who are these victims? The typical image of a trafficked person often doesn't line up with reality. While there are common vulnerabilities, trafficking cuts across all kinds of people. Still, certain groups are definitely at higher risk. In Houston, this includes the estimated 6,000 young people who run away from home each year, the more than 3,200 people who are homeless on any given night, and a big chunk of the city's estimated 100,000 undocumented immigrants. These folks often don't have resources, support systems, and might be scared to go to the authorities, which makes them prime targets. People of color and LGBTQ+ individuals are also hit disproportionately hard. And the ways these traffickers operate? They're insidious and they're varied. For sex trafficking, they use force, lies, and coercion. It's not always the dramatic kidnapping you see in the movies. Often it's a slow, manipulative game. Traffickers might make false promises of a better life, a good job, or even pretend to be romantically interested to draw someone in. Once they're caught, victims are forced into commercial sex acts like prostitution and pornography. The rise of social media has also given traffickers new hunting grounds. They use online platforms to groom and recruit, especially going after vulnerable young people. Then you've got labor trafficking. It's widespread but often less talked about. Houston's booming construction industry, for example, has a dark secret. A study between 2022 and 2023 found that a shocking 22.3% of construction workers surveyed in Houston had experienced labor trafficking at some point in their lives. Over 13% had faced it in the past 2 years, and 4.2% were dealing with it right then. Many of these workers are undocumented immigrants or people facing really tough economic times, making them easy to exploit. They're subjected to force, deception, or coercion, sometimes having their pay held back or being lied to about their jobs. Beyond what legally counts as trafficking, a staggering 42% of construction workers reported other labor abuses that, while not meeting that strict legal definition, were still deeply exploitative. And this isn't just in construction. Trafficking happens in restaurants, hotels, agriculture, and domestic work. This is where that phrase, bodies for sale, becomes terrifyingly real. Victims are stripped of their freedom, their humanity, and are treated like things to be bought, sold, and traded for profit. Making this tragedy even worse is the chilling fact that for traffickers, the cost of doing business in Houston has been described as unusually low. This low-risk, high-reward situation makes the city a tempting base for these criminal operations. The very things that make Houston a lively, diverse place. Its size, its sprawling layout, its major ports and highways, and its closeness to the border, are twisted and used by traffickers to keep their horrific trade going. They can easily move victims, make them disappear into crowded neighborhoods, and operate under the radar of an already stretched law enforcement system. The city becomes a maze, not of opportunity but of entrapment. So, how do these trafficking rings actually work? These aren't usually just one or two people acting alone. They're often organized, sophisticated criminal outfits that operate like a dark version of legitimate businesses, with bosses, recruitment plans, and distribution networks. They might involve local street gangs, national crime organizations, or even international networks. Their main goal is profit, and they are absolutely ruthless in how they keep control. Violence, or the threat of it, is always there. Victims are controlled through physical abuse, sexual assault, threats against their families, being cut off from the outside world, and debt bondage, where they're told they owe an impossible amount of money to their traffickers for things like food, shelter, or transportation, trapping them in a never-ending cycle of exploitation. Psychological manipulation, as we've mentioned, is also a huge part of it, chipping away at a victim's sense of self-worth and their ability to even imagine escaping. Trauma bonds can even form, where victims develop a twisted sense of dependence on their abusers, making rescue efforts even harder. And the link between human trafficking and other violent crimes, including murder? It's undeniable and it's deeply unsettling. Research shows that human trafficking in Houston is closely tied to violent crime, including murders. Trafficking rings often use extreme violence to control their victims, to punish those who try to escape, or to get rid of people they see as threats. Maybe someone who knows too much, or a victim who's no longer making them money or is too rebellious. Plus, rivalries between different trafficking groups or fights over territory and profits can explode into deadly violence. These aren't random acts, they're often calculated moves within a brutal underground economy. Looking at the bigger crime picture in Houston, violent crime is still a major worry. While some reports from early 2024 suggested a drop in human trafficking by 23% and homicides by 27% compared to the year before, more recent data paints a concerning picture. As of early May 2025, Houston had reportedly seen 112 homicides, which is up from 104 during the same time in 2024. This increase is worth noting because many other major U.S. cities were seeing homicides continue to go down. The initial research for this piece noted 101 murders citywide through April 2025. Kidnapping, sexual assault, and aggravated assault, crimes often linked to trafficking operations, also add to the city's violent crime stats. City of Houston data for April 2025 showed 21 human trafficking offenses year-to-date, a decrease compared to the same period in 2024, but these numbers often just scratch the surface of a crime that's mostly hidden. Of course, law enforcement agencies, including the Houston Police Department, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, and state and federal task forces like the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, are out there actively working to fight this. There have been some real successes. For instance, in fiscal year 2024 through July of that year, the Texas Department of Public Safety recovered 387 trafficking victims and arrested 874 suspects across the state. Just recently, in May 2025, the Texas Attorney General's office announced the arrest of a man in Houston for sex trafficking minors and the rescue of a 17-year-old victim. Another FBI operation in May 2025 led to the arrest of 5 people in Houston accused of sex trafficking teens. But the challenges they face? They're huge. The hidden nature of trafficking makes it incredibly tough to find and investigate. Victims are often terrified to come forward, fearing what might happen to them or their families, or deportation if they're undocumented. The sheer amount of activity can swamp resources. On top of that, prevention policies are often not fully developed, and there are big gaps in screening, identifying, and providing all-around support services for victims once they are found. Breaking up these deeply embedded criminal networks isn't easy. It takes sustained, multi-front efforts that go beyond just making arrests. It means tackling that low cost of risk for traffickers by hitting them with stronger prosecutions, seizing their assets, and addressing the demand that keeps this trade alive. It also means recognizing that nearly 90% of healthcare workers come into contact with trafficking victims but often miss the signs. That points to a critical need for better training in many different fields. The bloody price of Houston's trafficking rings isn't just a turn of phrase. It's paid in lives lost, futures destroyed, and communities torn apart. It's tough to say exactly how many of Houston's unsolved murders are directly linked to human trafficking, but the connection is a recognized reality among those fighting these crimes. These victims often die in silence, their stories untold, their cases going cold in the overwhelming flood of urban violence. They might be listed as victims of drug deals gone bad or domestic disputes, their true exploitation never fully brought to light. Families are left in an agonizing unknown, searching for answers that might never arrive. We see pleas from families like that of Angela Wafer, murdered in her home in 2015, her case still unsolved a decade later, with detectives thinking she might have known her killer. Or the family of Austin Knuch, fatally stabbed in his home in 2023, with authorities recently releasing new surveillance footage, hoping for a break. Now, we don't know if these specific cases are publicly tied to trafficking based on available information, but they paint a vivid picture of the pain behind unsolved homicides in a city where trafficking is so widespread. For those who survive, the scars are deep and they last. The physical trauma can be awful, but the psychological wounds, PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction, and a completely shattered sense of self, can take a lifetime to heal if they ever truly do. Survivors often face enormous stigma and blame, making it incredibly hard to fit back into society, find stable housing, or get a job. They carry the weight of what they've been through, often alone. Organizations like United Against Human Trafficking in Houston work to provide support, offering case management, counseling, and resources to help survivors rebuild their lives. The impact spreads outward, affecting whole communities. The presence of trafficking operations can wear down public trust, create fear, and even normalize exploitation in certain neighborhoods. It can lead to higher crime rates in general and create an environment where vulnerable people are always at risk. When young people see this happening around them, it warps how they see safety, relationships, and human dignity. So, what allows these horrific crimes to keep happening on such a massive scale in a major American city? As we've talked about, economic vulnerability is a huge factor. Poverty, homelessness, and a lack of affordable housing create a desperate population that traffickers can easily target with false promises of work or a stable life. A person's immigration status is also a major risk factor. Undocumented individuals are often terrified to ask for help from authorities because they fear deportation, and traffickers use that fear to keep control. And then there's the very nature of Houston itself. Its size, its diversity, its role as a major transportation hub. These are in many ways the city's strengths. But when it comes to human trafficking, they become vulnerabilities that criminal groups expertly exploit. That low cost of risk for traffickers in Houston, a point that comes up again and again in research, tells us that the current deterrents just aren't strong enough to outweigh the huge profits to be made from selling human beings. So this bloody price isn't just one thing. It's the lives brutally cut short and the grief of those left behind. It's the stolen childhoods and the lifelong trauma carved into survivors. It's the wearing down of communities and the systemic failures that let this trade thrive. It's the estimated $150 billion global industry built on human misery, with Houston serving as a key marketplace. This is a dark reality, but looking away just isn't an option. Awareness is the first step towards making a change. Share this information. Talk about it. If you or someone you know needs help, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is available 24/7. Support local Houston organizations that are on the front lines helping victims and working to prevent trafficking. And it goes without saying, but if you see something that doesn't feel right, report it to the authorities. Your vigilance could save a life. What's happening in Houston is a stark reminder that even in our most modern and energetic cities, ancient forms of brutality can hide in the shadows and flourish. The sheer scale of human trafficking and its violent fallout in Houston is a crisis that needs more than just a passing glance. It demands a sustained, all-hands-on-deck response. We've looked at the statistics, we've talked about how it all works, but we can't forget that behind every single number is a human being whose life has been irrevocably damaged or tragically cut short. Law enforcement agencies are doing vital work rescuing victims and catching traffickers, but a lasting solution has to tackle the root causes: poverty, systemic inequalities, and the demand that keeps this horrific trade going. It calls for better prevention, stronger support services for victims, and a community-wide promise to say that bodies are not for sale. Not in Houston, not anywhere. The fight is far from over, and the cost of failing is measured in human lives. Shining a light on this darkness is just the beginning. The real heavy lifting is in bringing the light of justice and healing to those who have suffered for far too long.